Thanks for joining. This is Mike Morath. I appreciate everyone joining for our superintendent call. Our Zoom license actually only supports 3,000 simultaneous users. There are 1,200 superintendents in Texas, so we normally think that's enough, but this is obviously a bunch of other folks are logged in to get an update. We may ask for some volunteers if we find out that superintendents aren't able to log in for folks to potentially consider disconnecting. Again, I want to appreciate everybody for taking time to be here and your patience with us while we've tried to get the rules finalized. What we're going to go over today in some detail are the rules that we're putting forth to allow for school systems to be eligible for full funding to provide remote instruction over the course of next year. We know that there's a huge interest in parents in ensuring that they have access to school while they want to keep their kids home, and we want to enable that and empower that. And so we're going to go over our guidance for remote instruction today. We're, I think, narrowly focused on that topic, remote instruction. You'll notice in this link today that you can find this same presentation online on our website, but with one edit, that it's not in the closure guidance and communication section. Instead, it is in the waivers, finance, and grant section if you're trying to follow along with the PowerPoint at home. We know there's a high degree of interest in public health guidance in terms of what the public health rules will be for on-campus instruction, but it is, as I'm sure everybody is aware of, it's a rapidly changing public health situation. So we are unable to give final guidance today on on-campus instruction. We are actively monitoring the situation, and we'll try to get out final information as quickly as possible. If you have seen any draft documents, just bear in mind that those are still draft working documents. We've been circulating some versions to try to get feedback as we continue to refine the situation. We're also working with the governor's medical advisors to try to provide as much clarity as possible, as quickly as possible, but we don't have that today. Instead, what we're going to talk about today is the framework to support remote instruction. Joining us today, because as we have worked to try to get this out as quickly as possible, this obviously has major policy implications for the state of Texas. And so we have our two lead education policymakers in the state of Texas on the phone with us today, Chairman of the Senate Education Committee, Larry Taylor, and Chairman of the House Public Education Committee, Dan Huberty. And I thought I would turn it over to Chairman Taylor and then Chairman Huberty for some brief remarks here before we get started. So Chairman Taylor, are you with us?
I am. Thank you, Commissioner, and I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you and our superintendents. We have been working quite a bit on some of these funding issues that you'll be announcing today. It's been a thorough process. We want to support the ongoing instruction for our students in using some of the technology that we were thrust into at the end of this school year. We want to be more prepared for the next year. We want to make sure we have the funding to help to do that. One of the issues we've been working on is connectivity, and we will have a large connectivity group working specifically on that, and we will be getting back with more information on that as well. But just from the state perspective, we are supportive of what you guys are trying to do in this new environment that came upon us quite suddenly. And I just want to recognize you for the work y'all put into it in a very short period of time to get this up to speed. Maybe not full speed, but up and running for most of our students. We want to make sure that we continue to move forward with excellence. We know we have a gap now with connectivity, and we're working on closing that as well as closing the gaps we've been working on for the last few years. So appreciate y'all's support, and appreciate the Commissioner, the work you've been doing on this. Very, very timely. The reforms we're working on were very important, and then COVID, so we've had some real surprises to get through. But I have full confidence with the people we have on this call and the people we have working in the legislature and the government. We will get through this, and we'll get to a better side, and we'll have a new and a better normal at the end of the day. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Huberty, are you with us?
Oh, great, thanks. As Chairman Taylor said, we've been working really hard with the agency and our teams and our staffs over the last several weeks to come up with appropriate guidance. You know, as a former school board member and one that knows that you've got superintendents on this call that have either passed their budgets or are going to be passing their budgets here very shortly. We wanted to make sure that we gave appropriate guidance on funding and what you're going to be speaking about, Commissioner, today. I think is important to give us the guidance, and I think we've all decided it's going to be critical that the kids go back to school. Now, what does that look like? You know, it could be, you know, in the seats, it could be online. There's a variety of different options that are going to be available. But I just want to thank the work that your whole team has done. And as you said earlier, you know, we're still working on the final guidance on the health concerns. And I know there's parents that are very concerned about that as we go forward. We want to make sure that we're giving the right guidance, but, you know, we want to make sure that when we talk about funding, that is going to be the most important thing to give some ideas and concepts as we continue to press forward through this virus and where we're at, that we have the ability to make sure that we're confident in giving school districts the ability to make sure that they have the full authority to move forward and educate our kids. And that's really kind of what this call is about today. So with that, Commissioner, I'll stop and thank you for all the leadership that you've had, and certainly with my counterpart, Senator Taylor and his staff, and the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker and the Governor. It's been, you know, long few months, but certainly working really hard the last 2-3 weeks on this has been very important. And so I'm looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Huberty and Chairman Taylor. For those of you on the call that don't get a chance to work directly with them, I think we're blessed in Texas to have real visionary leadership supporting public education and our public educators. So with that, let's get into some of the details, and I think it's useful to share some data that we have on what we know and what we learned from remote instruction when we transitioned to remote instruction as a crisis response. What you see here is a slide of data from a popular online math coursework system, Zern. This is a tool that we actually featured in Texas Home Learning. A lot of school districts in Texas use it. A lot of school districts around the country use it. And the sort of solid dashed line is normal levels of student usage. And so you can see the spring semester starts January. You're going to get ebbs and flows of student progress each week as the year is unfolding, but by and large, normal levels of student usage. And then the COVID closures hit in mid-March. And what you see from the graph is that our low-income students and our middle-income students, immediately student progress fell off of a cliff. And this is to be expected. We had a huge crisis and we had to transition rapidly. And what we see is that the rapid transition had an immediate impact. For our middle-income students, within a month, they were back up to normal levels of usage. But our low-income students, even despite our Herculean efforts, only ever returned to about 25% less progress than normal. And this, I think, is the central challenge that we have to face as we think about remote instruction when we come back. And you'll notice the red line is kids from high-income zip codes, my kids. And you know what we see is that the transition to remote learning did not land equally among our students. And I know so many people on this call, we are motivated to serve students, especially needy service students. That's the whole purpose of public education, is to create an equal opportunity to level the playing field for all Americans to access the American dream. What the data shows us is that we've got to be very focused and thoughtful in our approach to instruction for students who may be exposed to remote instruction for long periods of time, which is looking more and more likely for a huge subset of families here in the coming school year. So as we have tried to craft a framework, we've been thoughtful to this key challenge. We as educators our work is hard in the normal circumstances. It's made even harder now. But the simple fact remains: we cannot allow a public health crisis to become a generational education crisis. And I'm honored to work with so many educators, folks on this call that are focused on this same problem and trying to solve this problem. And again, what we have tried to do, working with superintendents around the state to come up with this this framework for remote instruction, is to be governed by flexibility and grace, but also ensure that we are in fact providing instruction to folks. So we have an FAQ that is, details everything that you'll see in this presentation. You can find it online at that webpage, but I'm going to give you a high-level overview here today. Again, when we think about where we were in the spring, we were educating as a crisis response. We set up a funding framework, which is normally based upon days of attendance, and said instead, let's ensure that everybody is providing instructional support, and we no longer had daily attendance funding. And we think that that was the right response collectively. I think everybody on this call probably concludes that there's no other way that we could have responded. But that was our crisis response, and we have to try to shift to what is going to be our longer-term approach here in the new school year. How do we shift back to a framework that provides instruction? So again, what we tried to do was create a framework that balances all 1,200 school systems' need for flexibility, while providing assurance that we are in fact focusing on delivering instruction to kids. So what we have been challenged to do, and this is why we work so closely with our legislative policymakers, is we had to make the legislative framework for average daily attendance work to accommodate remote instruction in the new school year. The ADA framework has some basic components. You're going to measure attendance daily. Schools need to operate for 75,600 minutes, and a day is at least 4 hours of instruction. That's the backdrop. We also looked at what the VSN statute was, because this is the existing framework for virtual instruction in Texas. It operates on a very small scale, but it was useful as a guidepost. A couple of things in the VSN that are worth surfacing. The VSN, for everybody that does VSN courses, they have to submit their courses to TEA for approval. And there's no virtual courses funded in the VSN below 3rd grade. I only say that by way of background. So what we are announcing today, what we're going through, is we're creating 2 new options for districts to generate daily attendance using remote instruction. We've tried to create a framework that embraces this concept of grace that we've talked about a lot on this call, because we are all doing our best and trying to respond to this crisis, but also ensuring that we are in fact delivering daily instruction to kids. And I should say, this sort of immediate response that we have made, all the changes that I'm talking about today are really temporary changes. We're announcing this for the 2021 school year. The legislature will, as they reconvene in January, are obviously going to look at the effects of this, look at whatever data that we are able to gather on impact, and guide a far more long-term policy for the state. So the 2 new methods for remote instruction are synchronous instruction, method A, and asynchronous remote instruction. And if we think about synchronous instruction, that's very similar to what is happening right now. It is live in real time. We have a chat feature for the 2-way conversation, but normally synchronous instruction is far more interactive with this. Also, there are typically fewer than 3,000 students online at the same time. But synchronous instruction is sort of live, real-time remote instruction, and asynchronous is remote instruction that is not live in real time. So it can be self-paced online courses. It can be pre-assigned work that the students do, reading that they do, writing that they do, and they watching pre-recorded videos with guided support, these kinds of things. Regardless of the instructional method, we've got to cover all of the TEKS, so our required curriculum has to be offered. But we would propose both of these methods for school districts to use at their option, and you can imagine a situation where you would do you would actually do both of these, maybe synchronous for some grades, some subjects, asynchronous for some grades, some subjects. It really kind of depends on your curriculum design. So when we get to a little more detail on synchronous instruction, synchronous is as close to on-campus as we could think of without actually being on campus. It's a two-way, real-time live instruction between teachers and students. And so since it's going to be live, real-time interaction, this teacher would record attendance basically the same way they record the attendance if the student was in a classroom. So the student can, hear the teacher can hear that the student's present or see that the student's present in the remote instruction environment, and then log the student in attendance. So they take and post attendance at a specific schedule, just like we do with on-campus daily attendance. There's full day funding for synchronous instruction. So each day that you provide full day funding, or each day that you provide synchronous instruction, full day funding comes, but this is consistent with the rules for on-campus instruction. So for a student who has got an instructional schedule that exposes them to more than 4 hours of instruction per day, that's 240 instructional minutes, that's a full day of on-campus instruction. At elementary school, it's also 4 hours for on-campus instruction, but that includes things like recess and breakfast in the classroom. So for the synchronous definition, it's a 3-hour minimum. Much like the VSN, pre-K through second grade would not generate funding for the synchronous model, but I'm going to come back to that because we have another option for asynchronous. Now, students don't need to be in front of the computer live and remote for 3 hours or 4 hours at a stretch. This doesn't need to be consecutive. They don't actually even have to be fully on a computer this time if you got them on the phone or whatnot, but there does need to be, in fact, 3 or 4 hours of instruction, two-way instruction happening over the course of the day. And if you have a student that is set up for a half-day schedule on campus, then you would work the half-day schedule for remote synchronous very similar to that. One key constraint is that your grading policy for remote work needs to be consistent with your grading policy for on-campus work as you had pre-COVID. So that's a base requirement to access synchronous funding. The funding is being established under the legal authority that we have as a commissioner waiver. You will need to submit an attestation to TEA indicating that you're prepared to deliver synchronous instruction. The attestation is going to be basically a checklist. The checklist elements are going to be like the examples that you see here. Ensure teachers are trained to deliver remote instruction. Ensure teachers have practiced at least once delivering a synchronous instructional. Ensure there's tech support available to troubleshoot student access, things like this. We're working with a group of stakeholders on exactly what that attestation should contain. We will publish that on 7/2 for everybody. We'll cover that on the call, basically Thursday after this. That transitions us to asynchronous, and again, asynchronous is remote instruction that is not happening in real time. This, unlike synchronous, which starts in 3rd grade, this is eligible for all grades. Much like synchronous, the grading policies for asynchronous work would need to be consistent with the grading policies that are used on campus. And this will also generate full day funding for each day that a student is engaged. The tricky thing is how to make asynchronous, not real-time involvement, not necessarily daily interaction, daily lessons from the teacher, how to make that work from a daily attendance perspective. And so there's this concept of engagement, and any day that a student is engaged, that's how you mark the student present. Any day that they're not engaged, then they're absent. And what does engaged mean? It's one of these 3 things happened during that day. They made progress in their LMS, they made progress with the teacher directly, or they turned in assignments that day. And progress is going to be defined by y'all, subject to some constraints in our learning plans or our asynchronous plans. So for asynchronous, it's also being established under the commissioner waiver. You'll have to submit documentation for us. Unlike synchronous, which is just an attestation, a checklist, asynchronous, because of the complexity associated with it, we're asking districts to submit a instructional plan for asynchronous The plan would have 4 key elements to it: the sort of instructional schedule, make sure, what is it the students are expected to be able to do each day. Is the curriculum that you're using, is it actually designed for asynchronous learning? So you need to provide some evidence that that has happened. Student progress, you have to define what that student progress mechanism is and make sure you have a way of measuring it each day. And then do you have a plan to support implementation in terms of supporting your educators and whatnot? These plans would be posted online for parents to see. They can include and would necessarily include differentiation by grade and subject, but there'd only be one plan per LEA. And then this is a key part of the planning process. All plans, when you submit them to TEA, would be initially approved, sort of automatically with contingent approval. And that a contingent approval would last for up to the first 3-6 weeks, and this is to make sure that everybody has time to get whatever changes they need in order, and then you can record daily engagement, daily attendance via Asynchronous as soon as you send your plan into us. So we're going to publish a template for the plan and try to provide a scoring rubric so that everybody has a very clear framework for the expectations for the plan. And we will release that also on July 2nd, again, Thursday after next. And this gives you kind of a basic time frame. We'll allow everybody to make, if for whatever reason the plan doesn't cut muster initially, there'll be a process for folks to have a couple of at-bats on that thing. So that everybody can get their plan fully approved by the time that the grace period ends, so that nobody has to worry about funding implications from this. So that's the basic framework for asynchronous. Those are the 2 new options. It's also worth mentioning that the VSN remains an option. So VSN funding is a little different. It's not a daily attendance-based funding system. It's an all or nothing funding for the semester or for the year based upon course completion. There are 2 paths in the VSN statute. There's the full-time virtual students, and then there's individual courses. So for those of you who use the VSN today or have some experience with it, this will be old news for you. But we do know that there are some districts that are considering adding a couple of VSN courses to their, at least their high school framework, as a way to deliver quality remote instruction over the course of the year to at least a subset of their kids. A couple of other things related to this this framework. So we know that everybody has uncertainty walking into this year. We at TEA, of course, have already been forced to compress our budgets by 5%. State leadership is committed to fully funding public education throughout, so as of yet, there's been no communication otherwise. And in fact, to sort of double down on that commitment to full funding, to provide predictable funding for folks over the course of the year, we're establishing an ADA grace period. And what we have heard from superintendents is that folks are expecting some pretty erratic attendance patterns when we return back to school. One, it's going to take a long time to stand up these instructional systems and get them firing on all cylinders. And so what we will do is we will compare your first 12 weeks, basically the first 2 sets of 6 weeks in the new school year with your average daily attendance last year. If your ADA goes down, we will simply ignore your first 2 6 weeks in this school year when we calculate ADA for the school year. So this has, again, been designed to provide a hold harmless, as it were, for school districts so that they don't have to worry about the unknown for what will happen in the back to school environment. There are some details on that are covered with more specifics in the attendance and enrollment FAQ that's been posted on the website, so feel free to check that out. And I'm sure as we get questions on that today, we'll sort of reflect on those and try to cover clarity and answer some of those questions either this week or in calls next week. And that ADA grace period, of course, is in addition to the full 3 6 weeks grace period for recording attendance for those asynchronous plans while they are if they have not yet been approved. So this is meant to provide grace, but also with the balance. You know, our system of public education has checks and balances to ensure that we, as effectively as possible, remain as student focused as possible. So the checks and balances for, you know, this framework are, you know, there are several. Daily attendance is of course still being taken. Remote student work is still being graded, consistent with on-campus practices. We've talked before about the STAR testing window and accountability, so we will still have that at the end of the year. For asynchronous, daily student progress with the academic content, daily student engagement does in fact have to happen. And then for asynchronous, the plans to deliver instruction in a way that works asynchronously must be submitted for review. So it's a system with grace, but with some mechanisms to verify, which, given the size of the state and the diversity of the state, seems to make the most sense to ensure that every pocket of the state remains student focused, and we have the same kind of assurances to parents and taxpayers that we've always been able to give with Texas public education. So that is the overview.